Nathan Bellis. I'm the music director here at St. Thomas More. Welcome. Thank you for being here. There's beverages over here, coffee, lemonade, iced tea. The restrooms are in this breezeway, the hallway. After the presentation, we'll head to the church for a brief prayer service, and then my brother will give an organ recital, just 15 minutes, and then we'll come back here for refreshments. So thank you for being here, and here's our chapter director, Kevin.
Well, our presenter this evening is a native of Elwood City and a member of the former Purification of the Blessed Virgin Mary Parish. He's going to stop me if any of this is fake news. Father Esposito received a bachelor degree in Spanish and secondary education from IUP and a master's in divinity and church history from Mount St. Mary's Seminary in Emmitsburg, Maryland. Ordained in 1978, he served at St. Bartholomew Parish in Penn Hills and at St. Columkill in Imperial before working in the healthcare ministry for 17 years. In 2001, he was named pastor of Good Samaritan Parish in Ambridge, and later at St. John the Baptist Parish in Baden and St. Benedict the Abbot Parish in Peters Township, before being appointed regional vicar in 2011. He was named the vicar for the Diocesan Initiative on Mission for the Church Alive, and is currently the chaplain for the Felician Sisters. Father Sam has been a member of our chapter for over 30 years and was a singer in a group called the Four Fathers, F-O-U, with Father Tom Smith. He's also a gourmet cook. And we are very happy that he could be with us tonight for this presentation. So without further ado, we'd like Father Sam to come up.
Thank you. I used to sing also in the diocesan choir years ago when it first began. And it was kind of after I was ordained a priest, but like, should I be down there? Should I be up here? And I was happy to be up there. So maybe I'll be back up there somewhere since I'm on my sabbatical, my leave that began on October 1st. I've had a wonderful first month off. All the tapes are being erased, and it's kind of like time to breathe and refresh. I'm doing the 19th annotation of the spiritual exercises. Anybody knows what that is? The long 30-day retreat, the Jesuit retreat. Ignatius also did for people that have other stuff in their lives. Like me, I have a four-legged beast that I wouldn't foist on anybody for 30 days, so I had to think of a way to do this, and so I go once a week to Baden, to the Spirituality Center at the Sisters of St. Joseph, and meet with the director. I'm still in the first week, even though I've been off a month, but we're getting the 30 days done over 8 months, I think it'll be. Interesting story, last week I subbed at Olsh, where I live, where I'm the chaplain at the high school, one day in Spanish, which was great because, as Kevin said, that was my training, even though I haven't spoken a lot in the last few years. I haven't gone to celebrate Mass in Spanish. But the first day that they called me, I was supposed to be the librarian. And I thought, yeah, I can sit in the library all day and handle that. Well, doesn't the biology teacher call off sick in the morning? And they're like, no, we need you in biology. I'm like, oh, math and science and we just don't mix. But they said, don't worry, the teacher left everything. You just hand out these sheets. I go into freshman biology, and if you've been around ninth graders, they're just a bunch of bouncing hormones. And you're trying to get them to sit down and do this kind of stuff. And, oh, no, we have a sub. And, oh, yeah, we have a sub, because that means we're not going to have a test. So the one boy began with a liturgical question, even though it was biology. Father, what? He said, is it in the rules if the server passes out at Mass that the priest has to continue going on with the Mass? I'm like, did that happen to you? Yes. He said he was serving at an unnamed parish, which he told me, and he said, that priest just went on right with the Mass. And I said, oh my gosh. He said, is that what you have to do? I said, well, I would have at least looked over to see if you were breathing. I said, didn't anybody attend to you? He said, oh, my father was there. It was Sunday. So a lot of everybody saw this, and they came up. I said, well, maybe Father knew that. I don't know who it was. So anyway, as the last year of my life unfolded as the vicar for on mission, I was really about the implementation phase, getting us to where we are now, and so I figured there really wasn't anything else that I had to do left with that job, and so I said to the bishop, you know what, I need some time off, so here's where we are. But I want to give you, because you may have heard that my master's was in church history, kind of the vision based on my recollection, before I get too senile, of how we've come to the place we are. And so what this presentation is really a dive into that vision that was first crafted by the bishop when he came in 2007 back from Green Bay. Secondly, it's an overview based on the perspective of how we got to where we are, and a chance to reflect again on the purpose and the scope of what is the dream behind, what is the hope behind, and how can we support that. What it is not is answers to any specific question about your grouping, or your employment, or ministry-related questions, because those are really handled locally. It's not ever been kind of connected to the diocese, because none of you work for the diocese, you work for the individual parish or parishes. And I'm sorry that I can't resolve any anxiety you may have, except to get you enthused about the vision, which is kind of where I've tried to keep my focus over the last, really since 2013, or you'll see historically how we came to where we are. Remember the Golden Girls, Sophia. Picture it. The 1990s were a time when, if you were around in this diocese, we underwent a major reorganization that was also supposed to have a second piece called revitalization. Remember, that's how it was built, the reorganization and the revitalization. We were 312 parishes in the Diocese of Pittsburgh at that time, and we went down to 215 or something close to that number. The reorganization was looking at the population changes, the shifts in demographics, and mostly affected were all those small towns along the rivers, what I call the steel towns, the Monongahela's and the Denoras, and the Beaver County towns, as well as the city of Pittsburgh, where neighborhoods had shifted and people had moved away. Primarily affected those. In many neighborhoods, you had the flavor of the month on the blocks. So you went from the German parish down the block to the Hungarian parish to the Irish parish, etc. In Ambridge, every second street, so 2nd Street, 4th Street, 6th Street, 8th Street, 10th Street, had a Roman Catholic parish. Doesn't count the 2 Eastern Rite parishes that were crammed in the middle of those as well. So at one time there were 7 Catholic parishes in that town. Those people had mostly married each other. They no longer spoke the language of grandma or great-grandma who came over, and their connection to ethnicity was, well, we go there because we eat pierogi, or we go here because, we eat stuffed cabbage, or whatever it might be. So food was, I was pastor of Good Samaritan after that merger, and food was what helped bring those groups together. So it's like, all the food is good, let's have it all instead of just one flavor. The large parishes in the suburbs, like St. Thomas More, were mostly untouched in that. And so it was seen as, okay, it's really the poor places or the small places that really underwent this. We broadcast that there would be revitalization, although I could say I was tucked away in healthcare ministry, thinking to myself, and this is how we know that God does have a sense of humor, boy, are you lucky that you don't have to deal with any of that. And God was saying, I'll get you, my pretty, because someday this will be in your lap. And I was thinking, I remember having an argument with somebody about, oh, just be happy you had a priest, and all these kinds of crazy things that you learn along the way. Anyway, it was without precedent because we were among the first places in the whole United States, and so there was not a guidance manual to follow. It wasn't like, do this, do this, do this. I remember that I was the administrator of St. Agnes in Oakland because the chaplains lived at that house, so we could walk to Montefiore and Presby and all of that, and other chaplains drove. We lived with chaplains for West Penn and for PGH and some other places, the VA. And we were kind of, all together like chuckling that we weren't part of this, but I do remember that St. Agnes, where I lived, was affected, and it became part of, joined with St. Hyacinth across on that side, became connected with the cathedral. So Fifth Avenue was the boundary. Hyacinth and Regis on one side, Cathedral and Agnes on the other, and I think Father Manuel became the administrator of St. Agnes. I knew I gave that over. But I remember that during that time, to get the appointments, we all went into a big room, and they just started alphabetically, and you could just hear gasps as everybody came up and got their assignment, because I think many of the priests thought, this is not going to happen to me. Most of the clergy were moved in that. For some, it seemed unfinished. Okay, we got here, but now we're just kind of fielding the anger of the people who have never thought it would happen, and how do I get these people to come together? So there really was no great support for that part. We moved into the in-between time that happened after the 90s up until 2007, when Bishop Zuby came back as our ordinary. We saw a decline in our area. We saw the sacramental trends, kind of tank. Fewer dollars given to support aging buildings, fewer ordinations of priests, all the demographic changes. There were mergers happening after that 1992 to 1995 reorganization, and they were just happening piecemeal, as sometimes parishes came and said, we can't do it anymore. We can't keep the lights on, or we don't have anybody coming, or, there's 3 kids in our first communion class. Those kinds of things happen. And priests, including one of my classmates, were assigned to multiple parishes in that time. I myself had that when I was in Ambridge and then got Bain as a kind of a bonus in the last year that I was there. And so Bishop Zubik, when he came, in his inaugural address, used a phrase that we're probably all tired of, but that became the phrase, the church alive. He tells the story of how he was having a conversation with somebody on an airplane. The person said, I used to be a Catholic. What happened? And the story unfolds. He described it praying about God's reason for sending him back to Pittsburgh. Like, why am I coming back now? He was drawn to the image of the early church in the Acts of the Apostles. And he talked about, from that earliest vision, because we were actually in the same support group when he first came back, how he was thinking and praying about what was the Holy Spirit putting on his heart to answer the challenges that were unique to the 6 counties in western Pennsylvania that made up the Church of Pittsburgh. He talked about being excited about being a Catholic, dreaming about a place where every adult would take up the call to be a friend of Jesus and to share that faith with each other. He dreamed about a local church that was vibrant, not just because you had one of those guys that everybody wants. When I was going around as regional vicar, people were saying, how come we didn't get Father so-and-so? And I'm like, well, because we can't clone him. That's against our bioethical kind of morality, or else I would have done that and sent him to you. But where every baptized person saw themselves as a disciple and undertook that call to go and make disciples and understood what that meant, and where all the gifts of the faithful could be called forth. So to carry out a piece of the vision, the bishop had this idea that we would go from the 16 deaneries that we had, and some deaneries were an entire county. Beaver County was a deanery, Lawrence County was a deanery, Butler County was a deanery, Greene County was a deanery, Washington County was 2 deaneries, and Allegheny County made up all the rest till you get to the number 16. He said, what if we go to the system that's being used in other places, and in fact is how the Archdiocese of Rome is organized, under a vicariate system where each area is under a priest who is the regional vicar, who is the bishop's liaison there, and who serves as the liaison of the people to the bishop as well. And so in 2009, 4 regional vicariates were established in 4 geographic areas of the diocese, each very different. So you have what Father Farrell calls the forest of Butler County, the northern, that golden section. I was number 3, so the reddish section was kind of the west, so sometimes people would say, oh, the Witch of the West is coming. That's where my Wizard of Oz allusions come in. The little piece that was the most densely populated in Allegheny County, Vicariate 1, which was mostly the North Hills, the city and north. And then the Smile, as I called it, from Carnegie to Monroeville, in Vicariate 2, the green area, which had the most people and the most parishes. Each regional vicar began in 2011. I came on in 2011. Each regional vicar began shortly after I came on to do parish visitations. And so we had these reports that we would do. We would look at records. We would talk to staff members. We would talk to the clergy. We would inspect things like the vestments and the vessels and the facilities. And in the evenings, we would meet with the pastoral and finance councils. One of the things that we heard consistently, it doesn't matter which area we were in, because the people in the very north and the people in the very south asked the same question, as disparate as those areas might be. And the question they said was, Father, what's going to become of us in the future? There are no young people coming forward to take up the roles that our older people have been doing. You know, to put it in Ambridge language, who will pinch the pierogi when Aunt Sophie goes to the grave? So, they didn't know what would happen. And we asked them, I remember drafting with John Flaherty these questions as part of that interview. What are your hopes for the future? What are your dreams? Whatever. The hopes for the future were always the same. We hope we will be around. Well, but what is the biggest challenge we face for the future? We know we might not be around because we don't have what we used to have, either by people or by dollars, and they knew that, they had 3 priests at one time, they were down to 2, someday they might be 1, they might be sharing, they were already sharing, all of those realities that all of you are well aware of. So they asked these questions. Why is nobody stepping forward? Where are the young people? And I think as we reflected on that, as we reported that back to the bishop, both with our kind of one-on-one annual sit down and review the reports that all 4 of us did, as well as the 4 of us meeting with him about every other month to give kind of the feedback of what was the pulse in the vicariates, one of the things grew very much in our consciousness was, the people are saying these things, but they're kind of don't touch anything. We're kind of worried about what might happen, but we're also worried about what might happen, if you get what I mean. So they were like, okay, we know that. And you know that the biggest swear word in Western Pennsylvania is 5 letters, C-H-A, 6 letters, C-H-A-N-G-E. And it's kind of people wanting things different, but resisting that. No, it's 6 letters, yeah. I told you, don't make me teach math. But we want to go in this new direction, but if you have to change anything to go in that new direction, well then maybe we don't want to go in that new direction. And so it's kind of, you can't have both. You either have to do something drastic to make a change if we're going to be situated for where we have to be, or we're going to have what's been happening is the smaller places will wither on the vine and just drop and drop and drop. And we began to see that in Vicariate 4. We went down from, I think when I started, there were 46 parishes in Vicariate 3, 46 in 2011, and 39 in 2018. So we had 3 areas that went through ad hoc processes that already did that, and there were 2 others in some other areas of the diocese that did that as well, kind of as a test case, because one of the other things that happened is we knew that when something as essential as we can't afford to turn the lights on anymore was what pastors were saying, papers that the pastor wanted them to sign every year because they were not really informed or involved. That would be the other piece that the vicars did, is try to gauge, are your councils really doing what they're meant to be doing? But that reality and the numbers of the future priests, because we were looking at people my age and older that were kind of marching toward retirement, and those financial struggles when you had about 52% of the parishes operating in the red, and that number growing, and the ministry opportunities saying, well, we'd love to have this ministry or that ministry. We don't have the dollars to support that. We don't even have the people to step forward in a volunteer basis to do that. So that became kind of the reality, and the questions on the right, should we just go ahead and let each parish kind of face what they were doing, you know, might makes right, survival of the fittest, that kind of a thing? Or should we undergo a real comprehensive renewal that would require every parish to participate? Somebody asked already, did we think about doing it in waves like Boston had done? And the answer was yes. And the thing we heard from Boston was, by the time we got to wave 4, people were tired, and we had given our best guys to the first, you know, the best places were in the first 3 waves, and the guys really didn't want to do it by 4 and 5, and so they had to do kind of a turn. I don't know if you know any of the people in Boston, but I vacation with a priest from Boston every year, and he's on his second. He was in the first wave, because he was one of these guys that was a go-getter and big place, and he's already been moved because he had to go into a place that was starting to flounder, where somebody didn't want to do that. So, you know, there were pros and cons to both, but the bishop said, you know what, I think it's going to be all in. And when he pulled the priests, they said that it has to be all in. We had learned that from the 90s. It can't be just, okay, we'll leave all the 20th biggest places alone, and they won't have to give up anything, and we're only going to go pick on the same, you know, the usual suspects. In the meantime, the priests had begun since 2009, actually a little before that, a program called Good Leaders, Good Shepherds, that brought cohorts of priests together to look at their leadership skills and to ask them to think about and reflect on that. And the bishop was in the second cohort of that. And one of the things you do, if you've worked with priests that have been in that cohort, is they are charged to form a team among other priests in that and to take on some actual kind of a project, kind of like their master's thesis, but in reality. I was in the first cohort, and I worked with, I was at St. Benedict at the time, and so we did something around faith formation, about the total family catechesis and all of that with faith formation, and using the music ministers to tie into the message of the week with the homily, like all of that kind of thing. We kind of did that. Their project, because he had the other regional vicars who hadn't been in the first cohort, so the 3 of them, along with Father DiNardo and the bishop and a couple of other people, I think Allmaid and someone else, were on that team in that cohort, and they were like, what if we listen to what the regional vicars have been saying, the reports saying we have to do something, and we come up with, like, how would we start this? And so the project gave birth to what was called the Preparatory Commission in 2013 and 14. From those discussions of the Good Leaders, Good Shepherds team that the bishop was on, he called forth a commission made up of lay people and clergy and religious to study the data and to propose kind of solutions. Where should we go with all this? We looked at other dioceses. I know New York and Cleveland and Hartford and Milwaukee and Portland and Maine and Brooklyn. We tried to look at places that were similar in size and not so similar, Baltimore as well. We looked at the projections of people from our data and our October counts. We looked at the priest numbers and the finance numbers, and we looked at sacramental trends. That ended, the Preparatory Commission ended in 2014, realizing that one person in diocesan staff at that time couldn't take on this endeavor in addition to keeping their own day job. You know, they couldn't take on one more thing because people were already being asked to do numerous things. So how should we do this? And one of the things that came up is we should hire an outside consultant to at least get us in the right direction. There were various opinions, and various companies consultant groups were interviewed. and the bishop determined that CLI, Catholic Leadership Institute, with whom we were familiar from Good Leaders, Good Shepherd, had the most unique kind of proposal because it was allowing the diocese to shape what they needed. The other three groups kind of came in with a plan. Well, you're going to do this first, you're going to do this, and you're going to do this. Good Leaders, Good Shepherds was, well, we're going to survey people, and we're going to see what the need is. We're going to look at what you've studied so far. So it was a different kind of approach. At the same time, the bishop brought on Dr. Ritzer to assume the position of coordination of all the on-mission things. As we began to roll this out in our convocations to the priests, it was interesting that 81% of the priests said, give us something to weigh in on. Don't make us go back and start building something from scratch. Give us something to weigh in on. So CLI took that very seriously as part of the feedback. While not everyone understood the bishop's choice of a consultant or why we even would do that, CLI, since its founding, have been dedicated to calling forth leadership from both Catholic clergy and laity. We knew that across the country, changes were evident in the data that was collected by diocese after diocese, and that some drastic measures in some places have been taken. Sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't. People were saying, well, we tried this, it was a bust, or we tried this and it went over pretty well. CLI listened to the bishop, who asked that his clergy always be the first commentators on the proposals as each step of the process was out. It's like, if they're going to be the men that have to make this happen, boots on the ground, do they think it's crazy? Do they think it should be tweaked? And so it was always brought that way, and there were many tweaks, I can tell you. One thing that the bishop insisted on was listening to various voices around the 6 counties, and so there were a number of focus groups. I remember one Saturday night I'm saying, well, what are you doing? He's like, oh, like 100 young people are coming to the seminary. I'm just going to sit with them and get their pulse of where they feel they should be, or I'm meeting with this group, or I'm meeting with that group. So there were different ways to bring people together, as well as the summer assemblies that Father John Marcucci, Father Tom Gunz, and myself presented, along with the bishop, called Rumors, Rumblings, and Realities. Those were interesting. Sometimes I thought I had to sneak out by the secret gate, and sometimes it was like, oh, people wanted to talk more about this. Okay. The clergy were encouraged to speak about the process each time we got together. Be sure to share this. Some did, some didn't. That's all I can say. There were bulletin articles that were produced before we even had the communications piece with Father Nick. CLI produced things that got sent out. I don't know if they got put in everybody's bulletins, but there was a lot of trees that died for this effort. Surprised there was some resistance. Well, you've worked with them, you know them. We had everything from angry priests to disengaged priests to confused priests to, all of that, because it's humanity. We're human. Finally, from the end of that 2014 preparatory commission, the bishop called forth the commission of 21 members, one for every district, and the 4 vicariates, and given the task, their primary task was to make a recommendation at the end of the consultation process on what the diocese should look like. These women and men chosen from the religious, the diaconate, and the lay faithful studied the data, combed through commentary, and participated in days of formation. I can't tell you how many things were in the share file, and these people got, it was like November, would have been 2 years ago, right? 16, yeah, right after when the consultations were happening, those district and parish meetings were happening, they ended at the beginning of December. So after that, when they saw all the stuff they had to go through, it was like, am I going to take a sabbatical from my husband and my wife, kind of thing, because they had to read through it. It was like, no, you have several months to do this. They're like, yeah, okay, there's a lot of material. But they, God bless them, I have such admiration for these men and women that were on that commission, because they really took it seriously. The questions that they asked that were challenging, the things that they said, did you think about this? What about that? What are people saying? You know, it says here in the commentary that this question came up. What about that? So they have my undying esteem for the work that they did. The draft models have been presented in the fall of 2016, 2 years ago. That spring, following the revisions, ended up in the proposed groupings by April and May of 2017. And the commission that summer really went through all of that other material, the feedback and all of that, comments on the groupings, what were the pros and cons, what were the ways that this grouping might survive 2 years, 5 years into the future. You know, well, if it's only going to survive 2 years, why is that the grouping? Should that change? You know, I mean, that were the questions. There were some groupings that, if you remember, they ended up recommending 48, not 57, because they were really concerned about A, the number of people, B, the number of priests, and C, the number of dollars. And so some places that the bishop said for pastoral reasons, I'm going to split it because I don't want to kill people from the beginning with the big territory, excuse me, or that kind of thing, that they said, it's not going to fly. They're going to have to come together eventually, you know. So, but in the end, you know, he had to make that choice. But they made their recommendations in early September to the bishop, who then continued with the priest council and the diocesan pastoral council, till he came to his final decisions, the work on the clergy assignments. You know, everything was announced last April, and it was perfect. You know, I can't tell you how many times it was like, okay, we're going to put this one here. No, it was there at the beginning, but people are saying it doesn't fit there. Well, but that's the best option of the three. And the bishop himself calling pastors in places like, okay, is this your final answer? Can you live with this? If we do this, what's that going to be like? And, you know, there was no perfect thing, because we don't live in a perfect world. But it was an intense effort to make the best of the resources that we have. The transition phase that began after the announcements and went through the summer focused on the priest teams meeting people, bringing the clergy together for support, trying to get everyone to calm down and carry on. On October 15th, I had already been 2 weeks into my happy sabbatical, but I prayed intently that weekend, and especially that morning, the implementation began. Contrary to what some believe, the sky did not fall. The sisters, where I am chaplain, go out sometimes to the 2 local parishes. They say daily mass has sometimes 70 to 100 people, and it's great. In fact, they went down to St. Joe's the other day. I don't know, the time didn't work for me because I had, I think, doctor's appointments. And they said, people said to them, it's so nice to see sisters here because the whole church is represented. Now the whole church is represented. So people are getting the image of we're all in this. You know, there's no magic formula. I know a lot of people thought that was going to be like a button, and on October 15th, that button was going to immediately produce something brand new, but it's the vision. We have to work at that vision and achieving it. It's a work in progress. Like every good endeavor, it takes time, energy, and patience, lots of patience. Our clergy are charting a new path. Some have been down this road, some have not. Emotions are all over the place. Staff are worried, priests are worried, deacons are worried. You know, it's no different, though, than the move of the pastor, except it's happened on a grander scale. So every time there was a change in a parish, we had the same kinds of emotions. I remember going into St. Benedict and people thinking, okay, who's this hotshot? Because we've heard about him. You know, and I always said, you got to give me a fair break. What you heard in another place might not be how I am here, because sometimes you are the way you are because of the situation that you encounter. The staff who share the ministry and the groupings have to remember, and that includes all of you, to breathe. Breathe, breathe, breathe. That's one of the things that my director keeps telling me during my time off. Are you breathing? Are you taking it all in? Breathe open, breathe often, and breathe deeply. What is the desired outcome? It's basically, I'm taking one of the values one of the core values of the Felician sisters that I work with, transformation. We need to be transformed. The bishop has talked about that conversion, that every person in the pew needs to understand the call of the gospel is a call to conversion, to reestablish excitement among the faithful, so that you don't have, I call them the pew huggers that come an hour before the 4 o'clock Saturday Mass so they can get the last pew, because they want to, thank you. I live in a very dusty farmhouse. It's over 100 years old, and I've been trying to hope I would not get my typical change of scenery. But anyway, the people, because they want to get to Kings for the early bird special, and they would be the people, for example, at St. Benedict's when, because we did First Communion, we had 9 sections of 2nd grade there. First Communion, we did section by section, Saturday night, Sunday, depending on the time. They wanted over so many weeks, I think 4 weekends in Easter season. Oh, Father, why do we have to have First Communion? I said, aren't you excited to see these young people here? Well, you should just have it at a different time or whatever. I said, well, they're part of this community. Aren't you excited to see the young people here? And I kept saying that until she finally said, yes, it's nice to see them. There's your answer. They're part of our community. There's your hope for the future. So, you gotta sometimes get the lesson across in a patient kind of way. But it's that idea of getting people to understand, see, you want everything to be good, but you don't want to make the effort to help it be good. So the fact that you want to be in and out doesn't draw other people to come to this Mass, does it? No. But if you're the welcoming person that you should be, and instead of moaning that Mrs. So-and-so's baby's crying, hold the baby. I'll take her for you, right? I mean, start to do the common sense thing. See, people don't want to hear that. But we have to begin to say it. And that's really where you come in, to model that by the way that the liturgical celebrations, and even by your presence in the office and on the campuses, really are perceived by people. My own thing, I've always been very much involved in the liturgy and saying that that's the most important thing that we do, because that's when we get the most people in front of us. But, of course, to have well-trained and prepared ministers who are actually familiar with the scriptures and the liturgical principles and what the missal says and the rites, etc. I know NPM, that's what they stand for, to be excellent in those areas. To understand that the first instrument is the voice, so what's going to entice Joe the mechanic to sing? What's going to get him to pick up that paper or that book? And, you remember that at 7:30, you can't be having the registration, not even for me, who's a tenor, up here. It's like the thing that I learned, that the way I preach to Saturday night is different than this person has on Sunday, much different than the one that's full of kids. It's the same message, but it gets couched in different stories or presented in a different way, or I might walk down among them, as opposed to being very kind of the 7:30 people are like, oh yeah, we like it, Father, because you're so traditional. Because I stand behind the pulpit, that kind of. So that kind of, being aware. And the other thing is really to just try to be open, always. When people come to complain, thank you. They may be crazy completely, but you listen. It's difficult if we've been trained a certain way to say, well, the liturgy document says this, that's why we're doing this, or whatever. But, because Mrs. McGillicuddy still wants that hymn to the Blessed Mother at every Mass. So how do you balance that? Keep the tempo, in your life too, as well as in your keyboard. And just make sure that people can say it. And take a cue from the culture. I've been thinking about that. And what I mean by that is, what's the kind of stuff that we, that we find ourselves humming. It's the kind of easy stuff that's out there, right? That people are singing. I said one of the things I know that I'm doing well is the other day I was in my car and I heard music, and and I know I didn't have Pandora on, I was singing. I had to think, where's that sound coming from? It was coming from me. But I was singing I think it was the refrain of one of the Psalms, actually, that I was singing, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm kind of praying. And I think that, how do we translate that? So the easiest setting of the psalm, the thing that bugs me the most is when the responsorial psalm, and I know we don't usually put that to music, but if you go to daily mass and they're reciting the psalm, and it's more than 7 words, right? It's like da-da-da and a comma and some more. How the puke are you supposed to remember that, kind of? So so we have to really kind of, I don't want to say dumb down, but we have to simplify if that's going to be the prayerful moment to enter into that. Because people remember sound bites today, fortunately or unfortunately. So what is our sound bite if that's all we get to make an impression to them? Your personal formation. Don't forget to read everything you get your hands on about bringing energy to parish life. You know the stuff from Rebuilt and Divine Renovation and what's the other thing? Amazing Parishes and all of those kinds of materials. We're not the only ones who have these challenges. Look at people in the business world who have gone through these kinds of things. Look at other areas, like I mentioned Hartford before. And it really is the team's effort as the staff comes together and coalesces, no matter how many or how few you are, what is the impression that you're giving to people. You model for the people in the pews how to come together. And it really begins by just paying attention to your language. Are we the body of Christ, or are we going to still be parish A, B, C, D, all the way down the line? I know some places have started to think of a name for themselves even before they begin. Are you still calling yourselves Cash? Catholics of Self-Heals?
Saint Cash.
Saint Cash. That was Father Horton's joke. Catholics at Self-Heals. He wanted to talk that people could remember. You have to know him, he's funny. And the evangelization, we have to remember, always starts with us and the people in the pews that are there on Sunday. Because before they can go out with the message, they have to have that message, right? The message is, why aren't you there, Mary? It has to be, you should really come because they're singing a lot better these days. Or, the homily is pretty good now. Or whatever it might be that would entice people to come and take another view. What can we help to create? That return to the Acts of the Apostles, the perspective that the gifts of the Spirit are many and are shared generously, and we just have to help people name them, call them forth, because they're given for a purpose. Can't be jealous of other people's gifts, but we have to call them forth. Structural changes are what people are saying immediately, but they're merely the foundation upon which we can build for the future. Resource sharing means every place has to have a chance to soar, and in the next few years, hopefully that will start to become evident. The attitudes and the mindset that we must go out instead of waiting for people to come to us. For so many years we were the best show in town, we're the only show in town. We have a lot of competition now. And so how do we go out to people? Why? Because we have something to share, a story to tell, a Savior to embrace. The baptismal call to holiness belongs to all of us, and we can't rely on others to do what each of us has been called to. So the people that say, well, I was happier when Father did it, or let the deacon do it, or let the music minister do it, or the DRE, or whatever. They want to clericalize everybody that has a professional job, so I really can just come and pray myself, me and Jesus kind of thing. While that's important to have a personal relationship with Jesus, you can't have a private relationship with him. There's a difference. Priests come from strong families where faith is lived daily, but so do deacons and lay ministers. So if we want to encourage people to take our places, because I hope to retire soon, in a few years, we've got to support the parents in new ways and strengthen family life. That personal relationship is not beyond anybody's capacity. I know so many times people say, well, that sounds so Protestant, Father. What does that mean? But, our bishop uses those words for a reason. And finally, how do we invite and welcome? This first year is supposed to be all about the welcome, getting to know people and building relationships. So the most important part is our ability to let people know that we are disciples and that we will do our very best to serve them and to allow the Jesus in us to meet the Jesus in them. Thanks. Any questions that I can answer? I don't have many answers these days, but yes, sir.
Very inspiring, and I'm very hopeful, Father. Thank you very much. We all have talents. I don't think they've been elicited enough in the past, and let's not dwell on that. But how about cross-germinating them? I like that word a lot. There are a lot of part-time musicians that have a wealth of other life and business experiences that we could start to elicit. And that's just another conversation, another thing to think about.
Right. And that has to be part of you being able to tell your story. One of my friends, who's the administrator of a grouping that's a rather large one, said that, they discovered that they didn't need, obviously, you don't need 4 DREs, and kind of some places happen by attrition, whatever, but he realized that the Safe Environment database, there was one person among these 4 who really was like head and shoulders above and offering the position of, would you like kind of undertake? She was thrilled because that's her, the detail and getting it done. So she's going to tackle that part of the program.
And she needed to be asked.
Right.
That's my choir members do. I invited a guy years ago, be a cantor. I've been waiting for her to ask me.
Yeah. Right. The personal ask. I used to, in my other hat, when I wore my regional vicar hat, I used to say, you want volunteers, you can't say in the bulletin, we need volunteers. You've got to go out to people, and you know that. So. And then you've got to have something for them to do when they come. You can't be by the ladies that say, well, that's not how we pitch pierogi here. Father Sam, these are not ravioli. They told me. I guess the lip was too big. Like, oh, I wish they were. You can leave now, they said. Well, thanks.
I know early on in the discussions when we had a lot of the meetings, one of the models portrayed having either lay ministers overseeing the parish or deacons and having the priests do all the sacramental things. But that seems to have fallen away, and what happened to that? Or
We had the 3 models with deacon administrators. We still have one in the Newcastle grouping. There is a deacon administrator. But the other 2 kind of didn't work out the way we thought, so they're tweaking that and looking at that. I think we're going to come to a day when we see that again. Yeah. At least the deacon administrator and probably broader than that. But the last thing from Rome was that was the preferred thing. If you didn't have a priest, then it would be a deacon first. Because we had other people ready to go in 2000 after when Bishop Bradley was here, because I was part of the interview process with them. And we had some people that I thought would make excellent parish administrators.
But isn't that true of religious communities? We talked about the Sisters of Baden. They do all the administrative work, but then a lot of the clergy are they're sacramental in that regard. So we already have some experience with that in our diocese.
Yeah, when we tried the deacon administrator thing down in Greene County, the deacon that was in charge there kind of ran the day-to-day stuff, did all of that. We had a team of 3 priests that went and retired eventually, and so there were 2 that did that. At the other model at St. Bede's, he was also the business manager. The deacon had been hired as the business manager, so he was already familiar to the parish in that role. And so there was kind of a confusion, I would say, from my perspective, because the pastor was still there, and it was like, well, who do we go to with this question? So it really has to be carefully, I think, I hate to use the word catechesis, but there has to be a kind of a way that people understand what that role is like. So it'll be interesting to see how the Newcastle model will work work out or not, because the man up there is very strong, who went as administrator, and he has definite vision, but he himself asked that that deacon administrator stay in place. So we'll see. Robin?
I had some blueprint. I got it today on email, and I read it. How closely do parishes have to follow the blueprint? Is that up to each administrator then?
It is. Father Jim, what did I tell you when I was in my former life? I met with, I was one of the support consultants for this group. It's like, do what you want with it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, as far as the music section, I was asked to be in charge of that, and then I felt that was a big responsibility. I needed some more input, so I'd asked Kevin and Don Fellows to offer some more input too. And the way I phrased it, and thanks Sam for keeping it pretty much the same. You know, as you read it, it's not you must do this, 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 buy this, this, things to consider, good practices that could unite your parish music ministry or whatever. So it's taken in that vein. Of course, that every parish, every grouping would be different, and you need to look at that. But I think there are some really good principles in there. It's more about principles.
It is, and that's what we tried to look at in the other components. We kind of used the music one first as a kind of that one, and the faith formation one that was very well done, kind of as a jumping off point, because it was about phases versus like by this date you have to do that, because you might not be ready by that date. You know? But it's like do this first, like put the basement in your house before you put the attic, and you know, that kind of thing.
Like phase 1 or whatever in one parish would not be the same as in another grouping.
Right.
You know, so anyway, if you have any questions about that, please see me personally or Kevin, Don Fellows.